Welcome, everyone. I am Kevin Burkham, CEO of U.S. Farmers and Ranchers in Action. We are a farmer-led organization that works to champion U.S. agriculture and raise the voice of U.S. farmers and ranchers on both the domestic as well as the global stage. I'd like to welcome you today to our webinar where we're going to discuss the findings of a new USFRA study that demonstrates how farmers can reduce input costs, improve profitability, and avoid millions of tons of GHGs. That study, called Enhancing Farm Profitability Through Nitrogen Efficiency and Yield Stability, was authored by our two guests here today, Dr. Bruno Basso of Michigan State and Dr. Jerry Hatfield, retired from USDA ARS. They found that approximately fully one third of Midwest cropland identifies as consistently low yielding, costing approximately 24 million acres in total, and can cost farmers up to $200 per acre if they're using uniform nitrogen application. By using yield stability analysis, which Bruno and Jerry are going to talk about in a second, growers can tailor nitrogen management to field performance history to save money, reduce emissions, and reduce nutrient runoff. This study, which Jerry is going to talk more about as well, builds on a study that was published late last year called The Potential for U.S. Agriculture to be Greenhouse Gas Negative. That study identified nitrogen management as perhaps the biggest opportunity to improve farmer profitability and environmental outcomes for agriculture. That study was peer-reviewed. It was conducted by 26 independent leading scholars, including the two guests that we've got here today. Um, Dr. Basso, as I mentioned, is with Michigan State University. They're going to talk a little bit more about this study. I did want to mention, too, before we jump in, that this research was partially funded by Edge Dairy Farmer Cooperative, by Wisconsin Soybean Marketing Board, and by the Minnesota Soybean Research and Promotion Council. So we thank them for their additional support. Just a couple of quick housekeeping announcements. This event is being recorded. We will be uploading it to our website and to the YouTube channel for USFRA. Please, we invite you to add questions to the chat and to the Q&A. We may address some of those in real time, but there will be time at the end of our hour today for questions and answers as well. So please do think about those questions as Jerry and Bruno proceed. If there's nothing else, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Jerry Hatfield, who will lead us off. Jerry, the floor is yours.
All right, Kevin, thank you. And thanks to USFRA for supporting this effort and everything. As Bruno mentioned, or as Kevin mentioned, that this is an outgrowth of a very large report that Bruno and I have taken part in to really look at what it would take to move agriculture into a carbon neutral environment. How do we look at improving the overall efficiency when we talk about either soil carbon or nitrogen management, closing the yield gap, energy reductions, all those different pieces of this. And as Kevin mentioned, that we had identified that nitrogen management was probably one of the first pieces that we should address in this because of the magnitude of the effort and everything. And so this builds off of a program that Bruno and I have been involved with for a number of years, looking and saying, how do we understand nitrogen dynamics at the field scale? How do we begin to look at this and say, what are the really limiting factors in terms of nitrogen response across that? And not surprising, it really is about the water availability to that crop that really determines how nitrogen responds. So we begin to look at this. Bruno will go into detail on yield stability, what that means. A lot of this has been published in different reports, and it's just recently published in a kind of a summary form in a Crops and Soils magazine article that really carries the same name as this webinar. And so that gives you the highlights of all this. We're excited about it from the standpoint of being able to deliver information to producers that says, understanding how your field is behaving, understanding these dynamics in terms of yield stability helps not only improve profitability, can also improve water quality, all these other pieces coming together. So that's kind of the introduction in all of this. I'm going to turn it over to Bruno and let him start walking through this process for us, and we really look forward to your questions and your comments to be able to help agriculture as we go forward. So, Bruno?
That's great. Um, Jerry, thank you. Kevin, thank you very much for the opportunity to present the findings of this study that you have kindly supported. So, again, thanks for the opportunity. As it was mentioned, Jerry and I have been working on this topic for several years. Actually, it was initially primed by a USDA investment, but now has led into a much more basically applicable, type of research, as it is actually shown in the CSA article that it was attached to the webinar and the press release. So, as the title said, and also mentioned by Kevin, the title of that report, which we encourage all of the listener to really look at, that is open, supported by the U.S. Farmers and Ranchers in Action, published by CAST, the potential for U.S. agriculture to be greenhouse gas negative. This particular chapter really focused on how nitrogen and nitrogen use efficiency will reduce the emission. But with Jerry here, we took a step, forward and synthesized the work that we've been doing over the last, again, several years, focusing on one critical aspect: the understanding of trade-offs between change in management and the cost associated with it. Whether, again, you were inefficient to start with, and the possibility of improving these nitrogen management strategies, such that you will basically make more profit while reducing the environmental footprint. This chapter was co-authored with my good friend and colleague Phil Robertson, but again, we focus here just on the N2O emissions, and this study goes a little bit broader, as you have seen. So, in that chapter 3, we really identify digital digital technologies, digital agriculture to be a potential solution in better understanding. So, both in monitoring, assessing, and evaluating, alternatives. And as the title that I put here, that is a revolution that now, whether we say, well, that has happened already in the last few years. Yeah. And this article that was featured in Forbes was actually presenting a little different angle to say, well, we finally are able to scale this work. Precision ag has been around for basically 25 years, 30 years or so, but the technology has significantly improved. The knowledge of one field wouldn't necessarily help someone else make a decision. And so that's really what's unique about the concept of yield stability that you'll see in a minute. And the other thing is implementing variable rate now. We're at a point where, we conducting study by spraying fertilizer using drones, or be able to irrigate only single rows. So digital revolution is not just, again, on the monitoring, but it's also opportunity on implementing solutions for farmers. So yield stability is this concept that is pretty straightforward. I mean, it's understanding spatial and temporal variability, historical performances of the field. These are two examples. We have 80 million acres, we have 8 million fields, and so on, that would behave just like this. You can see the top one, the crops rotating over years, the yields changing. The one below in field more in a rolling terrain, changing from one year to the next. And farmers are challenged by how do you expect me to go and implement variable rate change nitrogen if I only know what happened, if I use last year, 2 years, 3 years, all these patterns are not necessarily consistent. Well, if you look at the yield map in isolation, that's what it certainly looked like. But when you start analyzing differences between neighbors, so between space and time, then you come up with this concept of yield stability, which it basically describes how stable is your field. Is it stable in terms, yeah, these areas always produces high yield and constantly over time. So that's basically in terms of statistical, you set a threshold and you say it's within this change. It will never be 250 every single year, but the high and stable zones will be 230, 250, 240, and you have a range that is classified as good yielding. The problem, and that's really what we're trying to address here, that the low yielding areas, obviously varying between a low yielding in Iowa versus in Michigan, but you don't compare those. You compare that the same exact very field that one year had 140, 135, 142, 130. Well, it's very far from 250 or so. So that's the constant underperforming. It's very important to understand that when we say low yielding, it does not mean no productivity. It means just low yielding. But does it justify the investment? Because you run an enterprise, you run a business, and once you learn how much area, and the incredible number is that it's really robust across about a third of the Midwest, varying by state, it's constantly lower than the return on investment. So you basically spend $700 per acres and you get 500 back. There'll be very few enterprises that will continue to operate under this mode. Obviously, you make the profit on the areas where you do have yields. But how about basically tailoring these areas to do better? And so this yield stability understands basically this spatial and temporal variability. How did we get here? I mean, this is basically real data from farmers. We started using, yield mapping technologies. This was group of farmers across a number of years, number of collaborators. Started with family farms. People that had their farms were owned by families and wanted to keep operating them. So these are multiple years with years, many long. Now we have fields over 25 years and so on. So that's how we basically learn, by looking at this high resolution, few square, meters of yield mapping and this variation that we created. So this starts from real high quality observation about the change. But then, okay, we have in-house even more now, 350, 400,000 acres. That's a drop in the bucket compared to 80 million acres, right, of corn and soybeans. So the value came when we started scaling using the same approach that I've shown, but instead of looking at the yield observation that we get from yield mapping, we use the vigor, crop vigor before the signal saturates. So, and very carefully selected images, clean, and you will see these pixels that will always be basically thriving, others that will lag behind, and you see spatial variability that when the spatial pattern will really reflect in the final yield. So the big data set that we had, there was no AI or machine learning, that they were used for validation. So we didn't touch them and say, hey, this is an image that I get, field. You can click on any of these fields and you get a yield stability map. That was validated with the yield mapping technology. So this was a study that we started long year ago, very scientific in terms of quantifying the mass balance of, how much was lost in terms of, fertilizer. We know where it comes from. That ended up in the Mississippi River, 700 million the cost, a lot of energy lost and CO2 back into the atmosphere. But the numbers there are important. About 50%, 48% within field is constantly high productivity, leading to a nitrogen use efficiency close to 75%, which is incredibly good. As you know, soils are a leaky system, and rightly so, because we need water to go through eventually, that the roots will basically be able to access at a deeper profile, and they will be able to drain. You will have opposite problem, as is explained here, when in many cases you have water drought, and you have water standing in the same exact year, same season. And so you have then 25% constantly underperforming, and then areas that they fluctuate from one year to the next. So the Michigan was in that analysis. I wanted to show that the next thing is we have this edge scale now at 10 meters. So you look, these are basically yield maps that we will never be able to get from farmers. For the farmers listening, it's very important that you collaborate and understand. I always make this analogy, so forgive me, but if you need help and you don't feel well and you go to the doctor, you basically start sharing your symptoms, you sharing your analysis of your blood testing, and everything that you do that. You can't just say, oh no, guess what I have, it won't work that way, right? So the possibility of validating these approaches and working closely with farmers is what we have valued the most. Jerry and I work closely with farmers, and so we are in this position because of this incredible, valuable relationship. But we can see a lot from the sky. We can see a lot from satellite, and we can see whether you till or no till, if you have cover crops, and we can see yield variations. So this is basically an opportunity to understand that we have your yield map. It says, how do you have my yield map? No, well, that's basically the opportunity of having these plants being, detected, and their behavior will change in response to the light in terms of the greenness and the availability of water, availability of nitrogen, and so on. So high resolution data sets will allow us to basically perform this in an action mode in a way that you can really benefit from implementing variable rate. So these are real, because this was, table from an initial publication. The numbers are in hectares. I put the acres, and so we all know where big number of acres are present. And so here's the percentage partition, 47% of Illinois is high yielding, and 30% is constantly low yielding. 23% is fluctuating. 64% of the time is good. So 36% of the time goes down, which depends if you are in an area where the 36% of the time is possibly too much water, and so on. So we have this at scale, and we learned this partition. Now, when we use both to do the analysis of nitrogen use efficiency and be able to understand how much you would really save in terms of, because we want to help understanding what's the potential of saving. And when you aggregate all the low and stable in large areas, you get these incredible large numbers of possibility of pounds, to be reduced, in the million ranges of pounds across the state. And so here there is a range of what is possibly ideal or recommended, what's really applied, how much is taken up in the low yielding areas based on the analysis that we did, and how much is inefficiently used, and the nitrogen use efficiency. So 47 to 50%. So on average, you have 50%. It means the first, you buy, 2 bags, and you throw the first bag in the parking lot, and you only go and apply that. That's not the way, we should manage. And that's how it's an example, but 50%, is lost from these low yielding zones. This is, again, all measured information across, multiple fields, just a random selection of fields, 526 fields, with the knowledge of how much fertilizer was applied. And if you draw, the interesting thing even to point out is, over the last 10 years, yields are going up no matter what. But the low yielding still struggle a little bit better, insignificant. You draw a line and they're close to 140, 150 versus, the 250 in the blue zones. There's quite a bit of a gap, 100 bushel differences between the two zones. That doesn't justify 200 pounds of N that you would apply to both zones. And because this is an historical analysis, that really teaches us that this area received 200 pounds like this other on average, right? 200 pounds. Well, this benefited, the blue zone got it, but the yellow zone. So you can tell there was a nitrogen. It had the same amount, and it wasn't used. And so most of these lows, it's either not having heterogeneity of the stands, plant not coming well, compacted layers, shallow soils, waterlogging, all the possibility that all the things farmers really know that kind of not leading to us high yielding. So then later, as another part of a funded project that we integrated in this study to show that we wanted to really represent implementing the variable rate in a field, but where the farmer's rate was compared to the what was suggested by us in exchange of the as applied map. So this is an application. We needed to make sure that our prescription that has gone in thousands of fields was returned to us to be able to see what it really end up happening if it was our rate, more profitable and more basically beneficial to the environment and the dollar sign. And here is basically the comparison of the two. When you put all these fields together, you basically have these low and stable zones where no matter what, if they go from 100 pounds to over 200 pounds, they would just not be basically responding. And the good news is in some of the areas where you have deeper soil profile and water holding capacity, you even have a boost in yield, which is an interesting thought. So we're not necessarily against not using fertilizer. Fertilizer feeds the world. Allows us to, plants need nitrogen and so on. But putting it at the right place, right time is critical. And we're really finding that there is no justification to feed additional nitrogen, which costs money to the family farms and to the environment in the place where it doesn't get a response. So this was a cover, incredibly surprised by a major newspaper, the New York Times, that learned that, at Farmers Field, we were applying, basically doing the variable rate, using stability maps. Farmers were converting these low productivity areas in very, very limited amount of nitrogen and boosting yields in the area where there was a response. And we did that obviously with a fancy device that I'm sure got the attention also, spraying drone, which then we measure part of another project, greenhouse gas emissions. And so I won't say much, but I can tell you that a spoon feeding the crop with drones basically showed a reduction of more than 50% in greenhouse gas emissions without having a dent on yield between the application with the tractor. So more and more of that is coming. So we tailor this just to go towards more a little bit what really this means is you go from a profitability analysis, which is a conversion of what the yield map, how much you spend, how much you basically sold, and you have the areas where you have responses. Now there is a more drastic and possibly suggested approach in areas where you can benefit from working with, either companies, consumer packaged goods, food companies, where you would benefit by putting alternative crops. That can be, so the farmers that we worked with in Michigan, they had clovers, they have mixed species, forbs, and so then you have the biodiversity box, and actually the land next to the biodiversity even showed a yield increase by isolating everything else. So you can make money by selling ecosystem services and make even more greater yield and more money by spending the right amount of cost on the fertilizer, having a response on yield. So the profit, that same concept, obviously it's not just last year, because that's driven by weather. You could have a perfect year and you could have a little bit better profit. But over, the last 10 years, you didn't do necessarily well. So we call them profit stability, like a cumulative analysis as the same approach. And so you'll see that 11 years of yield data on these 75 acre fields leads to, and extracting just corn, on average, the high losses were close to $200 per acre. And constantly with the measurement. So there's no estimation here. There's yield mapping, cost of benefit analysis. And so that's concerning both for the farmers, and many farmers obviously commented not positively that they weren't ready to see this. I know it's very difficult to manage large farms, many fields. And so this opportunity really helps farmers understand where their money is coming from versus where they could stop the bleeding. So the other thing is highly dependent on the price, right? So you'll have corn is going much more in this direction towards lower prices. And so the low yielding zones, to be profitable at a low price, you have to harvest 296 bushel, which we showed it was close to 150 bushels. So you're really far from that break-even cost. And in some places where, the cost was lower and the yield was lower, it can be lower. But, the corn prices, as it increases, then all you have to do is 159 if you have 650 in terms of sales. And it's really not going in that direction. So this provides an opportunity to understand this break-even cost across space and time. Now, this is at scale using close to the current, corn price. And this means this is, profit per acre. The numbers is kind of a solid in there. It doesn't mean the entire county, that there are fields here in this county where the losses were this much. And so that's really only from the low and stable zones, basically losses. We send prescription, part of my lab at Michigan State. We identify in these areas that they're really losing money and be able to convert them, what we called, as I mentioned briefly, precision conservation. It's very clear to understand that the easier management is through nitrogen management. So even the reduction on these zones is really important. And then if you can change crops, if you can use alternative land use that doesn't require the same amount of nitrogen, this will be the new prescription in a way where you could do things differently. And you don't have to do a zigzag or a Swiss cheese where you have these holes and you go around. You can basically identify in these areas that they're really manageable, even with, obviously with the latest machine, much easier. That's an example of how we implement those pollinator strips or forbs or prairie strips. But now we don't take productive areas out of the land, production, but we take the low and stable zones. And so basically, again, win-win situation. Stop the bleeding, get paid for alternative land use, and reduce environmental footprint. So and that's a kind of good shot of that. I wanted to finish this. This is a work that has been funded also by the Agriculture and Rural Development. And the reason it's here, because it's the creation of a digital twin. We hope to continue this incredible, valuable collaboration with you, the US Farmers and Ranchers in Action. And so I wanted to share that if farmer says, okay, we have this yield map, what's going to happen? Well, how can I get mine? We're working towards creating a system that basically does that for free for farmers, but we would have to have financial support to extend beyond Michigan where we have all this. So I wanted to give you a very quick snapshot of where we're going with this and how this can be truly a revolution for farmers. So we call it Michigan, My Digital Farm. And as you have seen, you have a past, a present, and future analysis. You can do My Digital Farm. You go in there and you get, now it's not available yet, but it's basically off sites, but it will be launched at the beginning of next year. You can put your address there, or you can basically zoom in. You can click on any field and you get a yield stability map. So you get this, you can work through and you have options. This is low yielding area. Doesn't mean, again, no production, but it's lower than the others. So these areas is where you could have attention and significantly reduce the amount of fertilizer. Now the profit, where you're losing 50 versus 150, you can go to any other fields. When you get close to an area, it'll show us all the fields around it that they are available for photo analysis, which are all the fields, in this case in Michigan. The value here is, you learn this, you do the profitability, but now it says, okay, well, the farmer says, okay, good, I know that, I'm losing money, what should I do? And so it's linked to a modeling, a simulation model, very sophisticated model that is the easiest way to use it, the way we put it here. This was a model developed several years ago, funded by even the intelligence of the US to predict how much wheat was produced in Russia during the Cold War, been around for 30 years, developed by my former professor with myself. And so here you basically select all the management, you run and you see the changes, whether you do intermittent tillage, how much carbon you sequester or how much emissions. You can select the type of variables. that you would like to see. Then you say, well, but the cost of production, mine is less than 700. You can put another number. You can change your, bushels and prices, and then you'll see the change, how that, reflects in this. We feel that this is going to be for the first time really an incredible, platforms to help farmers basically start playing and become, basically embracing the digital transition. And so we hope to extend this to certainly all the U.S. Farmers and Ranchers Action farmers. And take-home message: yield stability. I guess you understood by now. You have heard us a few times. You've seen probably the papers, but important, novel, relatively novel. We've been working on this for a while, but it's still very novel for farmers to understand the historical yields performance that in these fields are partitioned in zones. So some remain in the same spot, some fluctuate. So understanding that, it helps you make better decisions from strategic point of view as well as tactical in-season point of view, because the weather can change during the season. 1/3 of the US and corn is low yielding. On average, as you have heard from the beginning, you can reduce significantly the amount of fertilizer. You can boost areas where you have a response. You have a losses of $200 per acre. You can manage fields based on this to get greater nitrogen use efficiency. It will reduce your carbon intensity score to do, the analysis, whether you're selling for ethanol or for sustainable aviation fuel. And so it's very important to even check the box where possible of biodiversity, bringing insects and pollinators on the farm, color through flowers and so on. And you really lead to better, reduce nitrogen losses and increase profitability. So with that, I'll stop. And obviously we want to, Jerry and I have an in-depth to the U.S. Farmers and Ranchers Association for the financial support for this study. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Dr. Basso and Dr. Hatfield. This is exciting, and I have lots of questions because it's there's so much to learn about this opportunity. And please, if anyone has questions, feel free to put them in the chat. But I'd like to, I guess my main question right off the bat, Bruno, is what's the catch? Like, this is almost too good to be true, right? Where farmer can reduce their costs, can improve soil health, reduce emissions. Where's the catch? Because oftentimes
Well, that's a beautiful question, Kevin, but I challenge with a different back. Okay, they have seen this. I will give them the yield stability map. Do you think they'll implement it? I hope so. So the truth is, this is a very scientific study. There isn't much error because the prescription that we sent were not real. They put it, in comparison. They witnessed, like St. Thomas, put the finger in the wood that it's really, I believe it. I've seen it on my farm that I don't get, a response on the nitrogen. There is still a complexity behind the decision making. And also, this is new. I mean, it's not available immediately at scale. That's why I wanted to bring that piece in the end. That, to me, is the breakthrough. Be able to have a platform that CPGs, non-governmental offices, farmers association can go there. We needed to get there. Now, I understand this is, but like anything else, hey, this is too good to have a cell phone that does all this. Well, it happened and we have it now. Let's make it work.
Yeah.
And my last thought on this, we need every level of outreach to be able to explain that, okay, we do have some level of protection to insurance. No farmers, I know them well enough, that wants to live on welfare.
Yeah.
They want to be able to trade the grains and they want to be able to do well. They want to be able to boost yields. And so the yields boosting comes from improving understanding how much nitrogen should go in the high yielding zones. But if you have seen that 200 pounds don't give you anything more than, 140 bushel, 30, 100, and the break even is a 180, then you really need to listen to some, you really need to do an analysis to say, why am I not shifting? The last piece is, okay, I don't have variable rate technology. I can't do what you just showed. Partially true. You can pay very few dollars an acre, an equivalent, don't want to do advertisement, but the Wilbur Ellis or any other, the cooperators, they'll come and they spray. We use them ourselves. Some of the farmers have such a large farms that they only can do the application only with one machine, and then the rest of the field is done with a contractor. So that's also another piece, and it will bring more rural prosperity. People are sometimes waiting outside the retailers, be able to get this type of thing. So I think it's just connecting the dots, and I'm leveraging on the scientific knowledge and the improvements in technology and improvement in modeling, which, as you have seen, farmers don't have to run the model. And sometimes we have asked them to do things. Oh, you should be doing this. Mate, I got no time to look myself in the mirror. I can't do any of this. So this becomes what I have always preached. Farmers need turnkey solutions. This is as close as gets to give. We sent Mississippi, prescription to Mississippi. We've never been to Mississippi, So it's this turnkey solution. It goes in the combine, the machine, and it gets implemented. I think it's a matter of informing that the system exists.
Yeah. So tell me that these numbers are real. So 24 million acres
Yeah,
costing $200 per acre,
yeah,
resulting in $4.8 billion
yeah.
of
Yeah,
essentially wasted nitrogen. Is that
And
real?
yeah, that's
that's
correct.
also conservative way.
Yeah. I mean,
$5 billion.
If you do the
five,
math, the cost of fertilizer, 24 million acres is conservative.
right.
Really? So
Yeah.
you think that's underreported? It's probably more than
Well,
that.
we didn't do the analysis for Texas, for
Yeah.
example, because that don't really matter for corn, So it's if they irrigate, they get a value. If they don't, they get 140 bushel. They shouldn't even wake up in the morning for that.
Yeah. Uh, These numbers are almost astounding when you're talking about the financial implications, plus the massive reductions in emissions. You talked about 50% reduction in
Mhm.
emissions.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then you've got to add in the water quality effort as well, Kevin. So I mean, if you look at the societal cost just on a water quality piece, I mean, we're talking about a lot of that nitrogen going down river or into groundwater. So I mean, when you really look at this, and I want to make one comment that kind of follows on your question, and that is that this analysis is not based on 1 year. This is historical data across fields. So that gives us a lot of stability into these patterns. And look at some of the maps that are there, that these are not dots within the field. These are areas of the field that are underperforming. So the precision application doesn't have to be that complex because you could
Very
identify those and simply change the rate on your current applicator across those zones in the field. So, I
Very
mean,
important point, Jerry. I actually failed to mention this isn't an area where a deer slept, went there and put the plants down. That's noise.
yeah,
That's really not what we manage. The analysis of the low and stable are basically 5 pixels. They are 1 acre minimum size. So the stability is 1 acre minimum size, that they're manageable. They're machine, ready management. This isn't a deer or a small plant that didn't come out, a section. And like Jerry said, if that was the next year, that should have been there at the same time, then you must have, a well or something that is a small area and you want to understand. But those noise goes away and it's cleaned out versus the larger area that you have seen. They're manageable because otherwise they wouldn't make sense. Like I said, I use the analogy of the Swiss cheese. We're not going to do zigzag or there is a hole. These are larger areas where you can easily lift the thing, change the applicator, and nitrogen is too important, too valuable, and not to look after because of it, like Jerry said, water quality and whether or not, N2O is a very powerful gas that we should we're certainly not rewarded from. And farmers know better. I mean, they have these programs where they say, hey, can you reduce nitrogen? It's really reducing N2O. We'll pay you for that. So there are several ways where this should be connected to and become a level of a registry or something where you say, hey, you have the stability map, you have this, you check the box. This is a verified level of, I always say the prescription and the as applied is a check for a farmer because you're showing this is what I've put. I've reduced already by 50% my, application or 70% in some cases or only 30 in other. It's technology savvy, but we're trying to make this system independent from them doing this because they ask, can this go with John Deere or can we this? We start making this available from a really solid science. The next thing will come when people start to adopt. That's why it's important that we continue these conversations and more advances within larger scale application. And the truth to finish, this was never done at scale. And so I feel that that's where the surprise is.
So let's talk more about that because you mentioned that technology is developing. The yield stability analysis. If a grower sees this and says, "Wow, I want to start this next year," what can they do? What can they do? I mean, I know some farmers know their fields. They probably have a good idea of what their low yielding zones are already, but what levers from a technology standpoint can they pull uh, this year in 2020 or
Yeah, I
2026?
mentioned, Kevin, I mentioned this briefly. So because this come from a public the universities making this available, farmers in Michigan would be able to do this selection already from a platform easy to use and hopefully can be done across the states. The immediate thing, it doesn't have to be with any level, it could be low tech. You have a low yielding areas, don't put as much nitrogen, which is kind of the opposite, as you know, of the industry saying, hey, low yield, even the technology that measures chlorophyll, you have a low chlorophyll and you put more. All you have to do is, where was this pixel last year? And if you notice there was always in the same spot and you put the same amount that it was sufficient, well, it wasn't nitrogen.
Yeah.
So it's like not having enough water to pull the nitrogen up.
Yeah.
So that the lever is it could be low tech,
Yeah.
reducing an application. That's all it boils down to.
Got it. There's a question in the chat, a couple of them that I wanted to get to here. One for you, Jerry, talking about farm economic efficiency. But could you also comment on the potential to monetize the emission reduction through large scale implementation? Can you speak to
Yeah,
that?
yeah, if you really think about this, and I'll play off of a comment that Bruno made, is that when we're implementing this, when you think about that nitrogen reduction, not only you've got nitrous oxide emissions coming out, you also have got a concurrent carbon emission because it takes carbon to produce nitrogen as well. So there's actually two benefits to that. We're going to reduce the carbon footprint. We're also going to reduce nitrous oxide emissions, which we're not paying for directly right now. But when you start looking at the cost of fertilizer going in, and everything else, then we can see that economic reduction. That's where the profitability is coming from. Now you get a profitability to the producer, you get a profitability in quotes to the society because we've done this. And you also think about this because there's this carbon intensity score dynamic that's running right now. Now, can we produce low carbon intensity grain that you can get a tax credit for? All of this plays into that. So then that becomes the economic return of that piece as well. So this is when we start talking about the next generation of digital agriculture, that's really where I think that we're looking at more than saying we're changing rate. No, we're changing profitability. We're changing all these different parameters simultaneously. And we want to help farmers take advantage of this knowledge to help them do that. And so I think that becomes the caveat in a lot of this is to step back and say, it's not about managing on a square meter basis or a square yard basis within that field. It's really saying, what can we do to help that farmer achieve a greater sense of profitability uh, on their whole field as well as their whole farm by taking advantage of some pretty interesting and scientifically robust information because we know the principles that are behind this now. It's really water dynamics, it's topography, it's all those other pieces in the field. So, when we look at all of these things coming together, it's really to be able to help that individual producer uh, achieve their own stability and from a profitability standpoint, all these other things coming together. So it's not about just saying how much have I saved in terms of nitrous oxide. It's really looking at holistically of being able to achieve a much different dynamic in American agriculture.
Yeah, it is exciting, especially now, with the cost of inputs continuing to grow, with the price for commodities produced flat to down.
Mhm.
Um, we don't, we need to start this now, right? And changing the conversation, right? It's just like you said, Bruno, the simple message of low yielding zones, don't put more nitrogen on it, right? But that's what my father did. That's what my grandfather did. It's getting that message out about profitability. Um, so that's what this study is particularly timely, especially now. I've got another question here in the chat. How consistent are the low yield zones from year to year from Steve George? And I think you answered that previously. Year after year after year, it's persistently low yielding, correct?
And in the case of being 4 years really low and then 1 year they spike, they're called unstable. The
Right.
value of analyzing, because they're from the past, you will know what caused that. If you look at 1 year and you were 140 and then all of a sudden that particular spot, large area will give you 180, well, you would realize that you had a perfect distribution of rainfall. Then it may not have happened, 5 millimeters every day, that kind of thing. So that's the scientific component, that if they are not stable, which means they go beyond the standard deviation, then they're becoming unstable and they require a tactical management within the season, because you monitoring and if this is the year. If you do the historical analysis for this field for the last 20 years and you see that 80% of the time this falls into that category, you will know what's unique about this 28%. And when you are seeing a nice basically growth and response, is this the 80% or the 20%? And so you adjust the unstable management because that zones requires possibly a boost in nitrogen because it has enough water now, to be able to get that.
Yeah, well said. We've got a question here. Tommaso Stella would like to ask a question. So I'm going to, Tommaso, I think your mic is open now. You're welcome to ask a question.
I'm sorry. I think I didn't raise my hand nor written anything in the Q&A.
Okay. All
Great,
right.
great work. Very interesting, but no questions on my side. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Your hand went up twice, so I felt like I was ignoring you, but I'm glad that I didn't. So thank you. I'm just checking to see if there are any other questions. It doesn't look like it. Just final comments, Bruno and Jerry, that you'd like to leave the audience with, please.
I guess I will go and just really, really summarize. This requires a spread of knowledge. We count so much on our collaboration, Kevin, because the technology is there, is ready to be rolled. It's a matter of months that people in Michigan will have it. It will be a matter of a few months to a year that anyone in the US could have it, a platform that they can learn what is the rate and the spatial, basically, location where they should change their management. So it's a combination of science and social psychology, rural, psychology, to be able to help farmers understand that they run a business, and even though it's easy enough, this is easy enough to change it. So it's not any really extra burden to be able to do this, because we understood that this is a turnkey solution.
I like that. Well said. Jerry?
Yeah, Bruno's and I, and I'll speak for both of us, in fact, that we're really here to try to help producers. And that's really, uh, since I retired from USDA, this has been my whole mission in life is to really help American agriculture do better in all of this. We know there's areas for improvement in all of this. This is one avenue of being able to improve that. And it points out that here's areas of the field that we can do a better job on that improve that profitability. I think we're all surprised by the magnitude of that change in terms of what we were losing in terms of money out there in that field. And so you really look at that, it's a matter of how do we bring this together to the next stage so that it becomes available for everyone. And this is not a complex thing in terms of being able to implement. Because as Bruno said, it's our minimum size is an acre out there. It's not a square yard. And so when you start looking at it in an acre size, you see all these other things. I would encourage producers that are on this to start asking questions about what could it would take to get yield stabilities across the Midwest. Uh, Bruno and I have already begun thinking about that whole process of doing that. It's going to take some resources to do there, but it's a matter of how do we take those scientific principles and scale them up and make that available to every producer out there because we think it'll have a tremendous impact on American agriculture, uh, and particularly in the Corn Belt across there, because that's our biggest nitrogen use system that we have. So that's our goal in all of this. It's really to help producers do and have the information available to them so that over the winter months, they can say, I'm going to try this. I want to understand that and put it into play in terms of what we can do with it.
I think that's a great point. What I like is you can start now, even using
Yeah, that's right.
low tech approaches like what you described. And again, the differences are massive. The implications are massive. These are not small numbers. These are not small impacts. And getting the word out about this to growers and to farmers is absolutely critical, and one of the reasons that USFRA supported the work. Dr. Basso, Dr. Hatfield, thank you so much for your time today. As I mentioned early on, we will be posting recordings of this webinar on our website, usfraonline.org, as well as our YouTube channel as well. We'll also send around on our social channels and other ways links to the report that Dr. Basso and Hatfield developed for us. And with that, I want to thank everyone today for participating. Wishing you a terrific holiday season, and we'll see you in the new year. Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
so much again. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye bye.